Okay. And do I have to press something here? Oh, press that. You guys get something on this line? Should we press continue? Is that what we do? Continue. All right.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm just recording now. So yeah, continue.
Okay. So that was the reason I went on to this long-windy kind of intervention, is that I think she's a modern because it's ineluctable. You cannot not face the challenge, and be grateful for the contributions of Darwin. But when you get into this world in process, she's not Heraclitean. She's not maybe even a Bergsonian. But we have here but we see that behind the actuality, which we confront and kind of tend to freeze in our perceptual habits, there is this other realm which he's trying to get us to think about, and not merely as an exhortation, as a fugue, as an aesthetic inclination. It's necessary. Things don't make sense unless we account for, unless we move beyond the actual and see the actual always in dialectic or in correlation with the potential. But in this essay, which Randy's translated, we have a extremely nice, nuanced, pedagogically rich account of potentiality. That's all.
Well,
and you can see I shared the Begriff der Potenz and a translation of it, by the way, in the chat.
Sorry?
In the chat for this meeting, if you click chat at the bottom, the chat thing will pop up, and you'll find I put in there the original Begriff.
Oh yeah.
I'll put them back. They won't open. Let me try it again.
Yeah.
I'll try it again.
Well, I just wanted to add something that Jim just said. So regarding these types of potentialities, which I don't know how long the list is, maybe it's indeterminate. So I just wanted to point out that we were talking, well, it seems to me we're talking about a number of different self capabilities, these self things, which are those potentialities that something has. And so a self manifestation, which sounds something like Marion's givenness, is different from what Conrad-Martius is spending much of the time in this chapter about, which is a kind of self-createdness, or a self-existing, that it's in and of itself, it can cause itself to be. Well, I guess you can cause yourself to manifest, I suppose. Anyway, I'm only trying to indicate that there's that I'm confused enough to say that there's enough different kind of self things going on, self acts, if you like, self manifesting, self existing, self creating, self activating. I don't know what else there is.
No, that's right. That's right. Well, that's exactly right. And I think that what my problem with that is, I wrote an essay or two on this, at least one on this, that I think my sense of say in the case of persons, maybe not in the case of butterflies or blades of grass and things like that. There's a distinctive, and I've written a big fat 2-volume work on this, but the sense of individuation or individuality that characterizes persons is in jeopardy with her theory, because this sense of itselfness here, if it's true that, and she resists this, she resists and has the biblical passages which suggest that there is no possible ontological double, and she thinks that's a form of a sloppy sentimental personalism, and she thinks that the traditional, say, Christian, certainly Catholic doctrine, that the soul is created as an individual after conception, or well, Catholics are all of a sudden have a revelation that it's with conception. But in any case, but her notion of the logos, of the itselfness, which is behind every major eidos, every major category, and the person, there's one logos which accounts for everyone we're looking at on the screen, and what distinguishes each one of us from one another are the accidental properties that we accumulate in time and space and history. And so I wrote, my reservations on that. I don't know. I think I sent Randy a copy of that essay. I can send it again. I think I have a copy of it somewhere. But in any case, that's not my critique. Is only as good as if it's valid. But I think that's the problem of when we start using the itselfness in all these levels, and it turns out we are the great Franciscan the thinker Duns Scotus had this category of aseity, the thisness, and he wanted a special thisness for persons because we all are individuals by reason of our genetic, our gender, of our biological, our cultural, our geographical, so forth. So these are all individual. But there's another kind of individuality which the theological traditions wanted to single out. It's like in St. Paul in Ephesians 1:4, I've chosen you before the foundations of the world. So we have the you there, I call a non-sortal referent. That you is not precisely this one and no one else by reasons of the individuating factors of space, time, so forth and so on. It's before all these factors existed. We are uniquely unique prior to the creation of the world, says St. Paul. Now, I don't know exactly, obviously, what St. Paul meant, but the theological tradition, and I give that with a resounding affirmation. Yes, and this is I think a lot of phenomenologists and contemporary philosophers, I'm not exposing anything unique, distinguished in this. This is a kind of a common view, not that everybody agrees with it. But the problem that Bill's putting his finger on, that the ipseity, or the isness, or the itselfness, it sounds like it's a general category, and the differences are only incidental, and I think a lot of people would say that. But Bob Sokolovsky makes the point rather dramatically when he says, you don't say, "Come here." I can say, I want to show you what if a Martian came back to his person, his people, and said, "I got a pictures of what a human being is. Here's a human being." Okay. Now we don't use. I can't say, "Oh yeah, I want to show you what a Barack Obama is," or Donald Trump. That's rendering that indefinite article renders persons species, universals. And my problem with her was that, in fact, that was the upshot of her handling of the entelechy of you and me, rather than and we were absorbed in the rich meaning categories of being a human being, an animal, a plant. All these categories, are part and parcel of being a human being. But being a person is not a kind. And I'm my own concern that she found, and she was dismissive of the uniqueness of human persons.
Actually, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Barney. Go ahead.
I guess the question that occurs to me then is, it seems like there's so much that is correct, or at least extremely insightful, about her discussion of nature and how potentiality is essential to nature and to the fundamental distinctions that we find, like living and non-living. But can her account be combined with your account?
I don't
in
know.
some way. That's my, that's,
Did you, I'm just going, I could, that essay, Jeremy's interested. I think I might have a copy, but I don't, I think at that time, I didn't think it could be when I wrote.
Are you talking about the archaeology of the spirit and the unique self?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I put that in the chat as well. Do you have access to that? At the bottom of your screen? There's like share screen, chat, participants, record, stuff like that.
Good. Thanks, Andy. Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, Jeremy can tell us what he thinks of that, or anybody for sure.
well, I guess what I'm not so much asking is, how should I put it? I don't think you're saying, I think I see what you're saying about Hesiod and how that doesn't, she somehow doesn't really have room for that in her account of nature. But her account of nature is so far beyond the standard physicalistic reductionism.
No.
And I think that is, I don't think you're saying, oh, we need to give up those insights.
No, not at all. No.
And what kind of interests and inspires me is
Yes. No.
further along the path,
No.
can we draw from her insights and find a way to bring your insights about Hesiod and the person together with that? That's,
I think that's right.
Things may have to be modified,
Yeah.
but I see her as of having accomplished something that we wouldn't exclude or leave behind.
By all means, and if I gave that impression, I want that to be corrected. Yeah, that's not it at all.
Well, just to be clear about,
Yeah, but I do think it poses a problem, and I've been wrestling in my mind. I'll just be upfront of this with the problem of abortion. I don't want to abort any babies. But I do think a lot of Catholic rhetoric about abortion, surprising for me. For one thing, many Catholics identify their Catholicism with almost the fetish of being pro-life. That's how you prove you're a Catholic. And Trump got 51% of the votes on that, on Catholic votes on that score. It's kind of remarkable. I don't want to turn it into politics. I tend to do that, as Jeremy knows. But the point here is that I was raised on Aquinas, and you did not have the infusion of the Spirit there. I think that was the phrase they used until later on in the pregnancy. Okay, but that was just continuing the special act of the creation of a spirit, because the spirits are destined to, in the very exalted theology of some forms of Christianity, their destiny is to share in God's own life, to participate in God's own life. And so their beginning cannot be continuous. And this goes to Jeremy's question. Their beginnings, their creation is not continuous with that of all of nature. And that's why I've got a lot of, and I celebrate them, radical ecological friends, which want to keep talking about the human animal. And I think that the Jeremy and I read other people who have a very robust notion of spirit, like Louis Lavelle and Rosmini and Shaka. And the reason for this this continuity, which was often turned into angelism. That was the concern, and it became the great charge of the ecological movement, that human beings were cut off from nature and they didn't feel responsible for nature. They could trash nature, and that's our dilemma today, is that we're trashing nature and think we can get away with it. And I think that's right on criticism. And I can't deny that the temptation towards angelism or spiritism suggests that human beings are not continuous with nature. And I just want to say they both are and they aren't. And I haven't been able to work out quite the formula, but it has to be said rightly. And it's an enormous political consequence, because experts tell us, we've got maybe 10 more years before everything goes to hell. So the I don't want my religious beliefs to be a major cause, you know, and supporting any views that think that human beings are not responsible, that as being stewards of nature doesn't mean that they have power to do with nature with what they, or nature's a non-human nature with what they will. So we have to say about, and I think Conrad-Martius clearly has the human being as spirit discrete, because it's freedom. She has a radical, I think we talked about a little bit in the book, a radical notion of freedom. So it's as not bound to the causality of nature. But on the other hand, she has in her cosmology the human beings of a piece with everything else. And Jeremy's put it right, you know, how to say both without leading to the evils of angelism or spiritism or environmental irresponsibility. It's a cause of the climate crisis.
Isn't she also saying that the individual human being that is an organism, as a living organism, has one essence? And
yes,
so that's where that might fit in with the pro-life position, that the human being, when does that unique organism begin? Nowadays, they're able to scientifically specify when the new genetic code is created.
yes,
And there's an exact point that you can even mathematically specify. And so there's a new organism that didn't exist before.
yes.
And so I think she would probably agree. That's the same organism that's sitting here talking to each other now.
I don't know.
Or would she? But my sense is that it has one nature, it has one essence, which is gradually becoming expressed. And the essence was there inherent in it somehow from the very moment of conception. Would she say that? Or I don't know. I'm not sure.
I think you're just raising an important question, which is very current today, of panpsychism, whether in fact, you know, you do have a divide between consciousness and non-consciousness in nature. My friend Ulrich Melle tells me that in radical ecological circles, Whitehead's becoming very...
well, that's not quite what I meant. What I meant to say is, if it's, and I'm not sure exactly, I don't understand her totally anything, but it seems to me she would say, a new organism come into existence at conception. And it has, and would she say, no, not that it's already conscious, but that the potentialities are already somehow inherent in that fertilized cell, in some sense, potentialities, or potentially conscious, and then that is already somehow essentially intrinsically a moment of the being of that fertilized egg. Would she say that?
Well, I think,
and not that it's already conscious. Not that.
Well, I think that's the issue of consciousness is fairly important for the subject matter of what you alluded to earlier, of what science can do, what brain science can do in terms of studying the fetus, and at what stage, you know, there's a robust metaphysical position out there that you have a human person at the moment of conception, a human person. So you've elevated person to a fertilized egg, or you've elevated a fertilized egg.
Well, that's not really what I'm trying to get at. I'm trying to relate this to the whole question of the entelechies.
Yeah,
and what is the relationship of the entelechy of being a human being to that fertilized egg? That's not is it really a person or anything? No, but there is that entelechy, and does for her. Yeah, that's.
Look at her texts, and she is saying, you know, and I would say too, of course, there is a community of essence of all human beings. But being a person is not the equivalent of being a kind. There is, I can't say there is, oh, he's a Jeremy Smith. No, strictly speaking, that's metaphysical nonsense. There's Jeremy Smith, and there's no Jeremy Smith.
Right.
Okay.
I'm gonna jump in here if I could. We were talking about this kind of relates back to the question of causality, and the point that there has to be some sort of proportionality between a cause and an effect. And I think that this is something that I think is extremely puzzling about this. And there's no, I think, thinking our way out of it, because I think it has a real phenomenal basis, that there's something about consciousness that it doesn't seem like there's any kind of cause that is proportionate to the effect. There's something about the inwardness of my selfness. It doesn't seem like there's no sort of like developmental, and yet it does come about, and it comes about naturally. And I think that, I struggle with the theological question on it too, because in some ways I think that for the doctrine of the church, I think there's a real phenomenal basis for saying something like, the soul is the soul, meaning the sort of my selfness, the interiority that's before any kind of exteriority, interiority divide, however you want to talk about it, is created immediately by God. And it seems like that's the only thing that could ever be proportionate to the effect, because it's not a kind of natural thing. It feels like it's not anything that could ever come about by the building up of causes. And I think that that's also something that's present in the debate. And I don't really know how to handle this. And I would really love to, it seems to me like it would be really difficult to keep a position where you say something like the I is a kind, because it feels like you lose the phenomenality of it. It feels like you lose exactly what it is, which is this just sort of ineluctable, I think Husserl is constantly pointing to this when people, charge him with like solipsism or something. He's like, but I can't get rid of it. Can anyone else? This is apodictic, and it's prior to the world. And I think that there's something really persuasive about that. And so I don't know even how you would go about putting these two together and avoid something like an anti-naturalism or a Gnosticism or an angelism or something like that. I think there's something phenomenal to that. I was just relating it to cause and effect in terms of the proportionality between the two, and trying to talk about causality in relation to consciousness. So that, just wanted to interject that into the conversation.
I think you put your finger on it for me too. Yeah. So, but Jeremy, if you would check her argument, why she rejects what she calls, I say sentimental personal, but she calls it personalism, and which is a uniqueness of persons.
And where is that again?
Pardon?
Where is that?
Well, I have it, the text in my essay but if you look if you look at, I think it's called Die Geistseele des Menschen.
Right.
And then I'm not sure whether Das Sein has text on this, but I'm pretty sure it's the Geistseele des Menschen. It's a tiny book, but dense, very, very dense.
Well, this actually raises another question that I think is really key, I think is coming out much more clearly now, which is when we're talking about it seems like the core of what she's talking about is trying to understand how something like ideas can be actually effective in making things what they are. And what does that even mean? But then then we get into the problem of individuation. And what is it that brings an idea from being something in common to something which somehow is actually shaping each different individual? And is that something that do you think that's something she does not adequately address? Or is that a weak point in her whole presentation? Is that a question that is not really clear in general, whether we're talking about eyes or even physical objects or physical entities?
No, well, I think I mean, Matthew, I think, addressed that, I think the word in the case of human beings, there's a certain dangerous, so to speak, maybe, ambiguity in speaking about the individuation, the person as an individuated human being. Because personhood is more than an individual of a species. And how to say that so you don't sound like you're talking, and that's as you know, I try to think about it through Castaneda first person reference, that when you refer to yourself, you're not referring to an attribute, you're not referring to a quality, a kind. Like everybody knows Jeremy, everybody knows Matthew, everybody knows Randy and David and Bill, and we can single them. We have personal identities there. And the characteristics. Oh no, Bill wouldn't do that, or Bill looks like this, or Bill's this sort of human being. We use sortal terms, we use categories of which are capable of being had by other people. And that's the whole marvel of that experiment that in 20th century philosophy came up, with what's his name, the guy I like so much, who passed on, the Danish philosopher Clavon, on the experiment with the double. You know that experiment where you have you're here and you're in a Star Trek situation, and you're sending Matthew to Vancouver, okay, and so you call it. Has he arrived? Yeah, he's here. He's looking fine. And as I'm here, hi, and then you realize Matthew's still there in where we are, Matthew now. But in any case, you have two Matthews, and that thought experiment of the double, because this kind of reductionist, the metaphysics of Star Trek, if you get the biological, chemical, physical basis of Matthew, you can move it around, and it saves costs on travel expenses and everything. You just put it in your computer and off he goes, and so then you have two. And so the question is, when Matthew 1 says I, and Matthew 2 in Vancouver says I, what are they referring to? Are they referring to those decisive cluster of personal properties? And that's the kind of issue. And I want to say no. I with other people. And so there's something, and as Matthew suggests, there's something about, and Novell would be saying this in spades, there's something about the experience of oneself, first personally, not third personally, not even second personally, if you can think of yourself second personally, it's a unique kind of referent, and there's something, in Aquinas says this, it's incommensurate with the rest of the universe, the person, and I think she's doesn't do justice to that. Now, however, the intricacies of working out the metaphysics of birth and conception and so forth clearly are not dismantled, because we are human beings, but we're more than instances of a humankind. We're more than instances of human beings. We are all that. Every quality we have is ascribable to persons, but other persons. But being Matthew Clemens, well, there can be lots of Matthew Clemens, okay? Could be dozens of them, but there would not be what this Matthew Clemens refers to as I. And when we say you to Matthew, we refer to what he refers to as I. And that's uniquely unique. It's not the uniqueness of something that's well individuated by accidents, by all the considerations that we can assemble. And I don't want to underestimate the uniqueness of persons as historical individuated human beings. Even on that level, it's a remarkable biological narrative, psychological narrative, historical narrative, geographical narrative. We're all uniquely, but that's not the same kind of individuation And I think that the text in Ephesians 1:4 suggests that I've called you before the foundation. Now that doesn't count as a strong philosophical argument, obviously, but I think it's an interesting cherry picking of the biblical text for a philosophical thesis.
You know,
Yeah,
Jeremy,
I'm sorry.
you mentioned the problem of trying to talk about ideas and how ideas can be efficacious. And I mean, in this realm with this specific problem, I think in some ways, in a kind of like theological vein, this is kind of the problem of the incarnation. And I think that the incarnation, I mean, certainly I think there's something different about that virgin birth, but there is a way in which the problem of the incarnation, the problem of the person coming to be in nature is a problem of incarnation every single time, because you have something that's incommensurate with the sort of natural processes. You have this kind of like idea, if you could talk about it like an idea, if you could talk about the person as an idea. I mean, I think that there's probably a rich theological history of talking about each of us as ideas in the mind of God. And there is a kind of way that problem, that theological problem of the incarnation is just present for each human being or each person in a certain way.
Right.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're both saying about, like the whole idea of aseity and what it means to be an individual person is not just an instance of a kind. I totally agree with that. And I think and I guess what I was, and not 100% understanding Conrad-Martius, I really wonder what she does with this and how she handles the problem of individuation. And I guess the one thing I wanted to say is, what kind of impresses me, I think the word is Selberkeit. Is that in selfness?
What's the word?
German, Selberkeit. Doesn't she say something like that? She uses words, she uses certain German words. I think you're
like selfhood, Selberkeit.
Yeah, Selberkeit.
Ichheit.
Selberkeit, Ichheit.
Well, anyway, she talks about its selfness. And I think part of what we're saying here is, if we reflect upon its selfness we actually encounter, whether it's a lion in the hallway or ourself or you or him, that's how we can come to understand that to see the meaning of its selfness as merely being an instance of a kind is leaving something absolutely essential out. And it seems like you're saying that she does tend to do that. She tends to see the meaning of its selfness as merely being an instance of a kind. And so that would be a criticism. And I guess having tried to wade through it so much, I hadn't quite seen that. But so that's helpful.
No.
And but on the other hand, I think the positive thing is that she is at least implicitly, I don't know, but I see a strength there is she's at least struggling with the whole question of how are entelechies actually effective in individuals.
Yes.
Her whole theme seems to be that inner bond that almost no one else really talks about. And there's something deep somehow within the individual. There's a bond, a connection, something inherited, something we can't really parse out or totally grasp, that in some ways essentially belongs to and is essentially constitutive of the individual, although, and that she's really, it seems to me she has something to say about that I haven't really seen anywhere else.
Yeah,
and it's very important, but then there is a weak point there that I think you're pointing out. And I also see what you're getting at.
I don't think it ruins everything by any means.
Yeah.
I just think that there's a, it's an old problem. Her friend, her goddaughter, Ada Stein, Sister Benedicta Acruce, Saint she criticized Aquinas. Aquinas's view is that he was interested in well, Aquinas's view is that there is her view pretty much that the individual person. Now Aquinas has an ambiguity. I'll say that the individuation comes from what he called the designated man, materia signata, that this form of being a human being gets individuated by the incidental material matter in the sense of the things that are capable of individuating a form. And Ada Stein offered a critique of that. And she offered a more radically personalist view. She discusses that, I think, in one of her big book from Eternal Being. I forget. I've written on that too a bit. But that's discussed in that big book of hers, which is a very good, there is a finite and eternal being. Oh, it's translated, very nice. But just a historical footnote, Plotinus wrestles with this. And he wrestles with the notion of whether there is an essence of Socrates. And that foreshadows the whole issue, doesn't it? There's only one Socrates, and there's an essence for Socrates. And he can't be participated in because it's a person. I mean, he doesn't say it quite like that. But there's a kind of, and in St. Thomas ran up against the problem two other ways. One way was, he said, kind of phenomenologically, a person is recognized by an ontological dignitas, a dignity. It's a phenomenal character that when a person has a dignity which commands respect and a kind of reverence or distance taking. It's not a thing. It's Kant's point of view. It's Kant's position. Persons are ends in themselves, never things. But Aquinas also wrestles with this issue, and many medievals did, obviously, in terms of angels. How does Michael differ from Gabriel? How does Michael differ from Gabriel? And so forth. The angels, the archangels. And he was a way of solving it, that they were not kinds, they were not individuals of a kind, they were kinds unto themselves. But Aquinas still then wants to inflate the notion of kind to being a radical individual, and that means individuality is thisness and thatness, instantiation, rather than something else. So the problem is really an interesting history. But I think in the 20th century, it's kind of coming to the fore in terms of some of the major thinkers of the 20th century.
And doesn't Aquinas also say the particular is not knowable as such, but only indirectly?
Well, that's very good, and that gets you into Duns Scotus with the hiseitas, the thisness. You can't identify the thisness in terms of properties as such, and so, but I think what Matthew is suggesting, if we introduce, and this is only a philosophical possibility, really, for whatever reason, except you have this interesting discussion of Plotinus, that first person reference becomes a field of philosophical reflection. If you think about it, almost the whole scholastic corpus is conducted in the third person. That the first personal singular pronoun doesn't have any philosophical interest. Of course, Descartes got it loosened from that, but even he was kind of slowing the button on these issues. So yeah, I think that if we want to move on, I just recommend you look at those passages. I think I translate most of them from the Geistseele des Menschen, the spirit soul of the human, in that article. And tell me what you think. But if the German, Jeremy, you can have that. You just read that, you know, and see. Tell me what you think. I just been fair to her, you know. But I knew it was an issue between her and her goddaughter.
I think one thing going on here is you and people like Michel Henry are saying something kind of revolutionary, at least in the Thomistic tradition. You're saying, no, the particular is knowable as such. It's hyper knowable. It's so knowable, we don't even almost recognize that we know it. And this is something kind of new, and in that tradition, very radical, isn't it?
Well, it's fascinating. I mean, Lavelle, I think, has in advance of Henri, you know, an awareness of this.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
So I was going to say something. I won't talk about deference to you. I won't talk about Ross Speedy. So.
Well, and then I'm realizing that he is really in the middle of this, because I won't go on and on, but that's what I'm seeing more and more, that he's stuck right there because he both wants to and doesn't want to say that the particular and the individual is knowable in itself.
What his fundamental feeling
really pulled.
Right,
he said the fundamental feeling is not conscious, and that we only know it within the objective form, which seems like we only know it reflectively, but he discusses it as if it was conscious. So it's really interesting. That's what I'm working on. Okay.
We're talking about an old Italian who died about 150 years ago.
That everyone should know. He's the greatest philosopher of the best. He's as great as.
He's very good. Yeah. He was a heretic for a while in my tradition. Got involved with papal states or something.
But John Paul II loves him, and he put him in his encyclical.
Right. Now he's Beata.
Right, he's blessed. The blessed Antonio Rosmini.
You Protestants don't know what that means.
I'm sorry. Can I say it? Excuse me if I even.
Can I try to move us on back to the text? I know that's a dangerous attempt, but I'll try to steer this battleship or turn it around. But there was another issue that I noticed in the readings that we had for this week that has been probably going on throughout the entire text. And that is this type of paradigm that I'd like to hear what Jim or others have to say is what motivates its necessity, if you like. And it's this relationship between the Hyle and the morphe. It seems like she's applying that metaphor, if you like, repeatedly, and in perhaps many different levels. I'm not sure, but that there's always, like we talk about the entelechy and then the essence material, and so we always need something like matter. We always need something like form, and that they're related and I think in all instances in a similar way. And actually, it's related to this issue you and Jeremy are talking about. So I'm just wondering if we could rehearse why it is that this is such a powerful idea, that this dualism, if you like, this tension or this necessity for the two.
And, in this reading for today, that is, I think, the key issue. And not only are there those two and maybe degrees of these two, if you like, but one way it's described in the Metaphysics of the Earthly, which we get a little bit of at the end of the book in an appendix, and that becomes important, becomes thematic at the beginning of both of these sections, 4.7 and 4.8, is this fourfold roots of elementary, the element, the element. I'm going to share a picture again of this diagram. I'm going to share a screen. I'm going to show this diagram. I'd like us to talk about it because I think a lot of the more general discussions we're having Yeah, good. You have your printout. Good. Jeremy, good. Yay. Now you have to laminate it. I think understanding like some of the terms here and some of the relationships, and it'd be really great if one day we could understand even the little arrows, much like you know, in Kabbalism, the SoPheRE, the spheres are like have like different directions that you go through. Yeah, I don't know if we're going to get there today, but I just wanted to point out a couple places in our text that help elucidate what's going on in the diagram. And I think it will inform what we've been talking about. Also because the stakes, the big stakes of ancient philosophy, you know, what are the ideas? What is the relationship between an idea and an act and a pure spirit or a form in different philosophers? And how does that relate to the hule, to the prote hule, to the mass hule? You know, in all these different contexts. And Conrad-Martius, there's like an overall schematic to her thinking that's in this diagram. But then when we get into these little discussions about like the species logoi versus the individual, or you know, the mass hule and its connection to like the wave field, you know, all these different ways of talking about them. So I'm just gonna share these images, and hopefully we can kind of talk about this diagram a bit. How does that sound to you all?
Good, fine. I'm going to make a pit stop. I'll be right back.
Yeah. So here's the diagram, right? We have this diagram, but let's see. I also started like making some more images of it, like for this one. I really just started like an hour ago toying around with, you know, the general structure of it. The fourfold is the extremities, right, and the far out points. But then it starts working to constitute material nature and reality. You know, so anyway, I think it's important to look at different aspects of the diagram. There's like the overall structure of it. I'm going to go to another one here. It's a more complicated looking version of the same, with the four, you know, four outermost extreme points being the fourfold. Here's the terms from the diagram without the lines. Okay, and here's a little bit of a translation. I'm not sure if it's perfect. Some of these are terms in Conrad-Martius, and some of them, you know, that we find frequently enough to have like a good idea of what they mean. I want to hear what Jim has to say about certain middle terms here. And then there's some things going on, like where is it? You know, there's some discussion of this, you know, plant, animal, human progression. And so anyway, you can see that in this part of the diagram a bit. It's not, you know, I was trying to figure out if it's like a square or a box. Jim implied, you know, there could be like a more than two-dimensional thing going on with this. So there's this kind of overall structure. And then from the metaphysics of the earthly, we have the table of contents is divided into some sections. Some of these sections are called two material roots and two formal roots. And they are these, and they're covered by a number of pages in that work. And here they are. So from, I guess it's Rodney's translation, or Jim and Rodney together, of just some of the basic elements of this text. What do we have, like the first 50 pages of it really, and the first like 16 pages or so in the book as an appendix. And then we have the table of contents. We have these four extreme points of the diagram. Right. So anyway, I'm just wondering, Jim, if you could maybe contribute to this discussion, understanding this diagram a bit better. Certainly, this is what these four things mean at the extreme points of the diagram. And clearly we can see a certain progression, along the left vertical axis of a plant, animal, but then man, anthropos is in the middle, mensch. So that progression, from the protehule, or in this case, not the protehule, but just off to the side of it, materie, right? So materiality, matter, just matter in the general sense, I guess, matter, plant, animal, and then human. So that like great chain of being, maybe that's like the ladder that she's critiquing, and instead employing the terms symphony or tapestry. I think this is the kind of tapestry you can see in this diagram.
That's right. No. Yeah, I think
right?
that's very good, Randy. No. Okay, I won't be much helpful. Let me just say a couple things. We'll go back to Bill for a second. I just want to emphasize that the way why she has these seeming from a distance, I think these these entelechy potency, and then the material potency, the prime matter and the form distinction, which she reworks, so it's hardly, it's not the same by any means. That I think we do best with this whole cosmology, and so I'll just say what I said at the beginning. If we look at that essay, and not just my garbled account, but that essay on the Begriff, Potenz und Neue, the concept of power and the new physics, which Renzi has put in English for you. That pedagogically is terribly important to keep this in the right context, because automatically we're going to make these finished things, and we're accounting for their coming to be by metaphysical principles, so that we don't get into some sort of what's that term, anthroposophism or something like that. And it's a temptation that haunts anybody who dabs or is drawn to religious matters, to think of the otherworldly as univocally continuing the meaning of this worldly. And so, in her case especially, so that, Bill, I think that what all those distinctions she's at pains to work out. For example, I can speak German, but I'm not speaking German now. So what's the nature of that potency? I can speak German. It's a potential potency. I'm not actually speaking. But if I knew German, I might be able to be the second Goethe. Well, that would be something else. If I were the second Goethe, that would be a potential potency, because I wouldn't be right now speaking poetry. But I could have not only that, I know German, and I have the ability, or I've learned from the grace of God, I've become a poet, a kind of poetic double of Goethe. Well, so he works that out with billiard balls, basically. She works it out starting with billiard balls. It's really quite an achievement to see how this notion of potency or power, which we take for granted, can be elaborated in her direction. Okay, now this diagram, let me just raise this question at the beginning. First, I'll go to Randy's point. I think that picture with man at the middle is terribly important for our conversation just now, and addressing the issues that Jeremy was pointing at, because this. Well, I forget his name now, but we were talking about the sense of the non-sortal sense of first-person experience. That doesn't undermine anything here. That's Jeremy's point. This holds, because Mensch is there, not Person. at the beginning. That's another dimension. But for her, it doesn't have to be there if I got it right. That's enough. We don't need to refer to any of us primarily as person or as in our first, in as our proper names. We have this is enough for her cosmology. So and this is a tapestry. We are in any part of our lives. All of these considerations are functioning now. And they're all being interwoven together, and we are modifying a lot of this too. That she has how we can affect. That's because I wanted to ask, after sometime, how would we handle climate change as it's predicted by the experts? If we are doing, how does this, what is our agency as the destroyers of nature look like, or as the ones who ruin the nature as we know it? How does that fit into this? I was just wondering about what you guys thought about that. Okay, now, Randy, what did you ask me about? My question is too, whether this diagram, when was this diagram executed? Is it, because this text is pretty old. It goes back to 39 and 41, where Selbstaufbau der Natur is written in the late 50s and Zeit and Raum are in the 60s. So I'm not sure what if this is the diagram, was this would be able to be considered applicable to the Conrad-Martius we know in the light of the later works. I just don't know. Do you have an inkling of that, Randy? I'm not hearing you. Did I do something wrong here?
Sorry, I'm here.
Yeah, I'm not sure. This is a question, because
no, you know what, this diagram comes from Rodney, who was looking at it in the BSV.
It came from me because I had this text. This is, and I would say Rodney discovered I had a unique version of this text, maybe the most complete, and I got it from Ave Lallemand. But my question is, does this drawing or this diagram, which certainly reflects the metaphysics of the earthly, does it reflect though what she have modified it, or is it are we to take it? And this is a hermeneutical question. I just don't know. May we assume that this reflects the later work, the most substantial work, her major contribution in Selbstaufbau, die Zeit und der Raum, und Geistsele des Menschen, and so forth. So I'm not sure. Rodney would probably be the one who would have the best guess at that. That's it. He's a genius at figuring things like that out. My sense is that this is unmodified, but the question never was raised maybe by anybody. And I don't think we know who is the author of this diagram either, do we? That's another question.
No, the candidates are Gisela Kaldenbach and Ave Lallemand and Conrad-Martius. And last time we discussed it, we decided it's
Gisela. I'm almost 100% sure Gisela is not the.
Okay.
Okay. Who's the other two? Ave? I doubt it.
Well, Ave Lallemand or Hedwig Conrad-Martius.
Yeah, those would be the two, I think. I don't think Gisela would. She was a psychiatrist, okay, and
right.
So, but I could be wrong, okay. But my sense is, would it be an Ave Lallemand in service and in deference to Conrad-Martius might have put finishing. This looks almost like a finished, work, so. But I just don't know. But the more important question: does it reflect the later work? And we don't. For one thing, we don't see the same categories here. They're a little bit modified, but it becomes an interesting challenge for anybody who's going to keep working on Conrad-Martius to see in what respects this does or does not apply, given in the light of the later writings. I think that's just a good question. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, well, for example, in Selbstaufbau der Natur, in the later 63 Selbstaufbau, there are these 2 pages which you referred to in the book as being, a very important table. Where is it? Somewhere in our reading for today. I think it was in the same footnote where you refer to the existence of this diagram. There's also this table, this page and this page, and it doesn't have the same terms as on the diagram.
No. And
but it's kind of dealing with slightly different topics. I mean, this is, these are metaphysical categories, but it's really more, Selbstaufbau is more talking about the biological context.
Yeah. And the whole theme of potency is looms so large in the later writing, but even though it's such a nuanced and unfamiliar notion of potency, because the Wesensintelligie, the essence intelligie, is, as we know, it's more than being, more than actual being. These, from just the diagram, it looks like it's somewhere out there. It's in a kind of an invisible actual space, but it's the category of potency. That's what I want to keep coming back to, so we don't portray her as an anthroposophist or something like that. She's got a very nuance for these ultimate categories. Wesensintelligie and Wesensstoff they aren't simply a repetition of Aristotle by any means. And the whole thing of the difference between power and energy, and then the active energizing power with directionality and teleology, all of that's worked in, into these notions, and that's not evident in the diagram. But on the other hand, it still suggests something we may not forget, that the human being is kind of, all of these themes are at play in the human being, because he subsumes all of the other intelligies and has a central role as spirit. So, but I just wanted to say that I don't think, my own suspicion is that diagram is not the equivalent by any means of that table of contents in the Selbstaufbau.
Yeah.
And it seems a little bit deficient, impoverished in comparison with that. But I don't see anything in errors here. It's only that we're talking about we have these categories, but we don't see them as dynamic potentialities, out of which we're able to, into which we're able to visit, squeeze or interject, the issues of DNA, evolution, quantum physics, and so forth. And she wants to do that because it's a unity. The cosmos is a unity, and they don't show up here.
Randy, could you, because I see these 4 points, I guess, maybe 6 points, I don't know, circles on the diagram, but I don't understand the relevance of all these arrows and these X's. So the diagram doesn't convey very much to me. I'm sure there's a lot of dynamics going on. I just don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, it's up for interpretation. This is a mysterious diagram, but I mean, the idea of a Selbstaufbau der Natur, also in other things like autopoietic theory, in a lot of different philosophies of nature or philosophies of life, the human is seen as a culmination of building, right? So the plant, animal, man progression, for instance, is going to pick up all of these, whatever comes before it, like maybe the prote hule, depending on like what kind of what kind of schematic system you're using, and the ultimate constituent elements, like even in Samkhya and Vedic thought, there's the unmanifest nature, Prakriti, and the Purusha, and then these come together to give you it goes the other way. It starts with the higher intellects, and then works its way down this into this tree of ultimately like the sense organs and the corresponding sense cosmos. But so in this diagram, I imagine man is in the middle. Maybe if you do think of it like kind of like a three-dimensional tower, man would be the highest point, or maybe spirit would be the highest point and man would be the middle point. That's probably more correct. But the extreme points come together and form one layer, and then it's a building up to get to that that middle point.
Yeah, I think
so these like, yeah.
I think this may be what you're saying, but I had a thought that just occurred to me about how maybe we're supposed to see it. There are the circles, the Greek, Leibzela, Zeilenwesen, there are 6 circles, and then arrows. Yeah. I think that maybe the idea is they're supposed to be overlapping, that you move the green ones and the black ones up, and then you move them all together so they're all piled up and overlapping in the center. Maybe that's what the arrows mean, because it's all
right.
It's all going into one individual integral being, and so these aren't parts. But what are they? I'm not sure, but maybe that's what at least some of. There are the green circles and the black circles, but then you've got Seele, Geist, Materie, Licht. Those don't seem to be referring to individuals. So, well, I don't know. That's just a thought. Maybe they're supposed to be moved on top of each other according to the arrows. I don't know. What do you think that might be it?
Yeah, that's cool. This is what I'm looking for. Weird speculation about the interpretation of this stuff.
I think we've all felt a kind of symmetry in her presenting her categories. For example, the spirit is ecstatic, but it's not the ecstatic of the instatic ecstasy, which is the ethereal. But there's something about the urätherisch, the primal ethereal, which has symmetry with the Geistseele and Geistwesen, because it isn't a klutzy sort of thing. It's not a material substance. So there might be something of the poetics of the term, because these things, a tapestry or a symphony is a good image. A lot of her concepts kind of work with a kind of musical interaction or interplay of the basic, and we have to say, when she explicates a very abstract concept, we're often appealed to something like the instatic ecstasy, and we're drawn to a chunk of wood, which is matter by being outside of itself, but it also has this inner gravity, this Hülle, which goes down to a center, which it's constantly eluding it, So we have that kind of interplay there. One of the other points I wanted to make before we wrap up, we'll probably come back to this, is that on the opening text of the Metaphysics of the Earthly, we have a remarkable statement because it's theologically very powerful. And it goes back to what Matthew was referring to earlier, about the way the concept of the earthly world, so this is das Irdische, includes within itself the earthly and the heavenly of the ancient tradition. So this becomes terribly important for the incarnation and the proximity in some ways to Teilhard de Chardin, because what the heavenly refers to is inseparable from the incarnation, inseparable from the earthly. It's not a spiritualist world apart from the earthly. So the notion of a new heaven and new earth are earthly categories. heaven is not a non-earthly category. We understand for Conrad-Martius the theological, metaphysical category of where human destiny is supposed to be signified in terms of the earthly categories that are already there. And I think that's it's like so many of her thoughts. They're really foreign to our initial take on the words.
Yeah, I mean, are there any further thoughts about the diagram? And I'll stop sharing it, broaden our discussion again. Oh, Jeremy, you're muted.
Upper left-hand corner, there's a green dot that says Pflanze and Leibseele, plant and body, soul. But then correspondingly is Seelenleib, soul body. So he's saying that a plant has a Leibseele, a body soul, but human beings have a soul body, a Seelenleib.
No.
That's not it?
I think, well, that goes back to what I just said, that the earthly, what we our earth, nature as we know it, in other words, contains within it. We can never get to the spiritual by believing behind utterly the earthly, or the earthly is a sacrament, so to speak.
Okay.
No, not that. It is separately connected with what founds it, and what we usually think of as apart from it. I mean, the Elementargeister over there with the Aether geistige Wesen. You have there. This is the themes of the Metaphysik des Irdischen when she's talking about these natural spirits that come up in the folklore and the myths of the Germanic and the what do we call the British, I guess. I don't know what are the right term. The Gaelic and the Germanic peoples they're just saturated with these figures. And but there's a continuity between Geistwesen, or there's at least an interaction, or conceptually and dynamically in terms of the Aeonic World-Periphery with the Elementargeister and the Geistwesen. So that's all goes back, and then it's all anchored in Mensch. And that, of course, God is the one thing that's out of all of this, except through the incarnation. But because God incarnated God's self, then nature becomes the fundamental category for theology.
So the reason she says Leibseele and Seelenleib is to show that it's not like that soul is involved with even plants and body is involved with even animals and humans, for example. That's kind of what's going on there.
No.
And then you've got Aether geistige Wesen in the middle. And so you've got Aether on the ether on the top and Geistwesen on the bottom. And then somehow when we're getting toward the human Mensch, they are unified. I don't know, it's confusing, but but there's this theme of bringing things together, like you're saying, that perhaps often we tend to think of as having nothing to do with each other, but that's kind of the theme here. No, it all does, everything does have to do with everything else.
Yeah, well, like take man in the middle here is made of all of this stuff, and yet is only getting constituted from these two arrows, one on either side. So ultimately we have our sources in these fourfold roots far out, and maybe they then collapse into at some deeper level of analysis that we can't see here. Maybe they then collapse into a fundamental twofold, or a relation between unity and the twofold, or the continuity and the discontinuity. And these are the kinds of things that we think about in Plato and Aristotle metaphysics,
well, I think,
as well.
But I think, Randy, what you have to keep in mind is that for her, the resurrection, I mean, we're going to, to go back to the theological theme, is terribly important. That the resurrection represents the version of the new heaven and new earth, which is the destiny of the earth. But the new heaven and new earth is not something non-earthly. Already in the earth, we have the new heaven and new earth, but in potency. And in the incarnation that's released, it's like what you would call a releasing factor, a releasing form of energy, because she has this mysterious undeveloped theme of the loss of integrity of nature, the fall. And whatever the major obstacles for the appropriate destiny of the earth into the new heaven and new earth is symbolized in the incarnation. And for her, the new form of humanity, as briefly glimpsed in Christ's bodiliness, which is really strange. Even for the New Testament account of Christ's presence is very strange. But she's saying it's strange because the full potency of humanity is being actualized. And this all comes together then in a different way, as you're suggesting, in the resurrected humanity, which is the new heaven and new earth. It's a resurrected nature too. All of nature is resurrected, it's all transformed into the new heaven and the new earth.
Are you saying we would get a different diagram, or just that the reading of the diagram would be different, like man would be
I think the diagram
more in the middle?
Differently. I'm saying you have to read this in the light of her view of what the telos of humanity is, in terms of Christ's resurrection as embodying and making possible the new heaven and new earth. That's why that passage I mentioned, we understand heaven and earth only in the light of her version of what we call the earth. This is a philosophical, theological cosmology of the cosmos, but that's a shorthand for earth. Earth doesn't mean, and she says that frequently, just this planet. But
so the mensch in the middle, is that integral mensch, or is that like fallen?
It's all man is willy-nilly, man regardless is the center of the cosmos, the creation, it's the center of creation. But there's a way in which the themes of Geistwesen, in themes of material, light, or the ethereal, all are transformed, and we don't know exactly how, but they're kind of sacramentally, symbolically indicated in the resurrected Christ. So I think I'm just suggesting, as we have to think of these not as, a nice display of basic categories of Conrad-Martius, we have to think of these mostly as essence and teleches, out of which the finished universe, but the finished universe is in motion to its own destiny of a resurrected universe, right. A new heaven and new earth. I mean, that's that first couple paragraphs of the Metaphysic of the Earthly point to that, so. And I think I include some passages in there too when we start talking about heaven, But it's a very it's a very earthly heaven, but it's not to be taken in a Dionysian or materialist sense. But it goes back to the question that Jeremy's raising: does her, for me, missing the individual, the person, that doesn't get affected. And by that oversight, if it's an oversight.
One thing I heard you just say that I hadn't quite gotten, are all the circles and X's different essence and teleches in this diagram? Except for mention the center.
Well, mention the center, and the four outermost are all not circles, and they're X's versus a cross, and the cross, maybe it's just incidentally, a cross marking the point, but maybe that's like the the cross of resurrection there, or we could think of it like that. And then these X's on the far outside, they might be like the arrows. I don't know. What do you think, Jim?
Well, I think it's a tension. These pull apart conceptually, but when we start fleshing out what the concept means, they draw together everything else for her. We can't understand any one of these extremes, X's, for example, or any of the circles without the others. And a mensch particularly, and I think that, of course, the cross could be just an intersection, but I think Randy's right that this is more than incidental.
It's interesting that the real ontological method at some point in here is described as a tensional structure in chapter 2. Erstreckung or something like pulled out or
stretching out.
Erspannung.
Entspannung. Yeah, that would be a relaxing, but that would be fit. You'd have the tension, and then you'd have the relaxing of the tension. Because
here it is. In diesem im Voraus gespannten Rahmen, in this heuristic context, the real ontological reduction or attitude. There's this idea of, I don't know. I just picture the real ontological reduction being, a hypothetical or heuristic.
Yeah.
You like hold a hypothesis, you hold it open, and this is kind of like a holding open of an idea of the self-building of nature to give us the right picture of, the real ontology of, or the real anthropology, I guess, here.
What page is that on?
Well, on page 44, for instance, 43, 44, you're outlining the phenomenological attitude of Conrad-Martius as a real ontological attitude. And there's at the top of page 44, and this is going back to chapter 2, the method of the real ontology. Finally, there is a specific sense of the phenomenological attitude which is proper to the real ontology. It is thus a real ontological attitude. Here, the enactment or non-enactment of the general thesis of the reality of the world is not a matter of indifference. Rather, its enactment is required. The world is presupposed as factually real, whether or not it factually exists. In this heuristic context, and then in parentheses it says, in diesem im Voraus gespannten Rahmen, everything is seen as, so to speak, burgeoning forth or raising itself up out of the real context in which it participates.
Good.
And so
that's all right.
So I mean, the idea of the polar structure that we're then talking about in our reading for today, and in the beginnings of the metaphysics of the earthly, this polar structure is also like a pulling open and holding open of these polar coordinates to give a disclosure space, to open maybe it's just ideological, an explanatory schema. Maybe it's more than that.
This is just talking about what to Husserl here, because he reduced the world, he reduced being,
right?
He reduced our spontaneous natural allegiance of being conscious that we are there. There's something there. There's not nothing. And she said, you can't back off from that. You never leave that. That's being awake. That's being conscious. And so, but it's more. There's more to be said about it. And that's why I'm writing the real ontology. and that's this. We are already in this open clearing of Heidegger. We're always already there, and we don't reduce that. But there's more to be said about it because things come forth, and that's what Bill was asking about itselfness, Selberkeit. You know, and they come forth from out of themselves. So that's I think that's what that's referring to. But it's not a, you know, taking account of the zeitgeist in terms of evolution or positivism or non-positivism or something. It's all tucked into the real as it presents itself with this initial, and which for her unfortunately was so reduced, engagement with being.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought of this real ontological reduction as being also a kind of expansion.
Well, yeah.
With all the ecstasies and the retroscendence and all that.
You get your first steps towards the cosmology, the metaphysical cosmology, from this what Husserl calls the natural attitude.
Yeah, I mean, there's this footnote, I think it's at the end of chapter 1, maybe. You say that this is reflexive cosmology, like real ontological phenomenology is a kind of reflexive ontology, and that, or cosmology, and that's always for me been the image of the self-building of nature, you know, pulling itself as a totality. Anyway, I'm just.
I don't know where that passage is, but in any case, that's an interesting angle. It's very Hegelian, because I mean, she's enough of a phenomenologist, Husserlian even, you know, that first person evidence is crucial. Even though it sounds like we're out in, you know, left field and la la land, sometimes it's all tied to. Sometimes she gets to la la land, so to speak, you know, by analyzing billiard balls rolling. And then you get this notion, what is the power of the billiard ball to be able to roll? Well, it's nothing unless it's pushed. Okay, what does that come from? Where's this? Well, it's disposed to be able to be pushed. But that the billiard ball, you know, would then hit another billiard ball, and you'd win the world billiard championship by that ball hitting that ball. You know, those are potentialities existing in that standing billiard ball. So, but you need
here's the footnote. Factors. On page 22. By the way, I mean, I just think these are the cool quotes from earlier hits. Footnote 51 on page 22 is the activity of making visible the essence of the phenomenon in its showing of itself is a way of recovering the primordial movement of the entire cosmos. Yeah. As we shall see for Conrad-Martius, the entire cosmos is envisaged as an ecstatic othering of itself from out of its own constituting ground. The cosmos is physis, and phenomenology retrieves this basic motion. Thus, for Conrad-Martius, one might say that phenomenology is reflexive cosmology. Yes. And this is clearly active in these themes.
Yes. So it's reflexive in the sense it's self-actualizing. It's self-referring in the sense that it's acting upon itself. But it doesn't say that there's a cosmic world soul behind it all. That's another story.
Right.
That's not her story, though.
All right, well, I'm going to stop sharing this now. I do want us to find out more, talk more about that diagram. I'll talk to Rodney. I'll find out from other people. It's an interesting thing to meditate on as we go through these sometimes very complicated and unfamiliar regions.
Yeah, but it reminds me of some, you know, she did read some anthroposophists. She wasn't disdainful of them. She felt they had kind of intuitive glimmers of things. And, you know, but there's one of the anthroposophy, like Rudolf Steiner, for example. So you have these figures, something with man at the center frequently, you know, in the whole cosmos, the whole universe centering in or being explicatable from moving from man outwards. And that's so that's I forget, I don't know where those texts are, but she does somewhere make comments on some anthroposophist that she was reading, and maybe if I recall right, some writings of Steiner might have interested her at one time too. I can't remember though for sure.
I know Gerda Walther was interested in Steiner. Maybe they met.
Yeah, but
I don't know if Steiner was a part of the community.
I don't think they had a whole lot of conversation. I think they were good friends, but Walther was Hedwig's major political activity that I know of in her lifetime was writing a critique of social Darwinism. I've mentioned that book in the past, but Goethe was, as Rodney be the expert on this, but Goethe was a genuine activist. You know, she was a critic of capitalism and didn't want Marx to be put into stupid pigeonholes. You know, and I don't know whether how active she was, but she. So they would have been quite different in many ways. And I think one of the interesting, kind of occasions for meditation, her husband, Theodor Conrad, was this very good philosopher. He did some wonderful work on the imagination, and in the psyche. But I wonder what kind of conversations they would have had. They seem to be such different personalities in terms of where their field of interest lie,
Right.
But in they had that long stretch of time hiding out from the Nazis. I don't know if he wasn't Jewish, but she was, and Jewish blood anyhow. And they had to live off their apple orchard. And sort of live a hidden life, underground, but they had to live too. So they had to sell that fruit somehow. And I imagine they had pretty long, cold, lean winters, eating old apples that were in a cellar would have been pretty tough going, if you wanted some protein. So, but those
right. Well, I think we need to wrap it up, and I think that our next meeting will be the beginning of chapter 5, the Aeonic World-Periphery. So we've made it to volume 2.
Where does volume 2 begin? What's that?
So that's page 173.
Oh, so did we call the first 170 pages volume 1? Okay.
Well, in the original dissertation that you wrote back in
did I?
70.
I didn't know that. Thanks, Randy.
Yeah.
Well, I was wondering whether maybe I'm planning to do it. I've started reading this Begriff concept of potency that Randy distributed, and it looks pretty readable. I'm wondering if we shouldn't try to explore that to some extent.
We read that chapter next time. I'll look at your translation if I may, and I will.
And by the way, my translation, it's really a Google Translate translation. I adjusted the words to make it make more sense, but it's not perfect.
Oh no, Google is sometimes, for all of its goodness and all the debts of gratitude I owe to Google, it's as stupid as a stone sometimes. So so yeah, it's gobbledygook. So okay, we'll so but that's on here, eh? I mean, how do I get that now? How do I get to that?
Yeah, I'll email it to us. It's in the chat. You could click on it if you open it the chat right now, but I will email us and also the original text.
Yeah, that should
send those both out.
That text, if you've got it translated,
Yeah.
To Bert, what's his name? Jeremy, for Phenomenological Philosophical Research. Bert Hopkins.
Oh, Hopkins. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
or maybe
true.
a review of metaphysics. I mean, it's quite good, and so we'll see. We'll go through it. But so that's what we're going to do next time. Is everybody in agreement, Bill, that we pursue that next time?
Yeah, well, let's do that, and let's maybe just introduce and start getting into the chapter 5.
No, we
Maybe
will.
maybe we can
No. So
decide
when
over
do we meet?
email what exactly we'll cover.
And when to meet? You'll let us know when we meet again. If I'm not, can't be absolutely sure when my radiation continues, and I'm not sure how that's gonna, but I'll try and be here. So that's
Yeah,
it.
I mean, maybe September 10. We're entering the semester, so we're all,
Yeah, you guys.
a lot of us at least.
Some of us are retired.
Yeah. Yeah,
Instead
but
of
I mean,
just-
I'm down with the 10th.
Instead of saying retired, Jim, I just say we're just tired.
What was that, Joe?
Instead of saying retired, I say we're just tired.
No, it's retired, Bill, not retarded. I think the word, Jeremy, help me out. Doesn't the word mean in French withdrawn? Isn't that's part of the etymological reading?
Retirer would mean pull back, I guess, wouldn't it?
What it mean? What?
Retirer would mean pull. I think that means pull back.
Yeah, pull back. Yeah, yeah.
So
Okay,
are
well,
you saying
we'll
we're not-
focus on celeritas.
Okay. All right. Retired.
But you can be tired and then retired. Which is more tired? Tired.
But I tell you,
tired.
I'm old enough now. I'm senior here, and I have take this privilege of saying you get to a certain age of retirement, and it's a hair's breadth away from retardedness. So
Well, we
Not
could, instead of that
retarded.
word, we could say retro-tired, like retroscendence,
oh
or like
yeah, yes.
yeah.
Well, that takes energy though, and at a certain stage of the game, that retroscendence doesn't. Where you get behind yourself to get a hold of yourself and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, that's kind of hard to do.
Retro-sunkenness.
Yeah, yeah.
We're trans
How about that?
tired.
Trans tired, yes,
trans
by all means. Abysmally tired. I'm in the instasis of the estasis.
We're sunken into ourselves.
Yes, I'm collapsing into Hyletic, what does he call it? She call it the Hyletic inertia, the inward inertia, and that's where I'm going. Yeah.
We're vegging out.
Oh, veggie. Yeah,
We need to veg out.
That's still bears a trace of life.
All right, well, we will self-other now. We will retire, and we will also self-collect.
Very
Okay,
good.
and I'll see you all in email land.
Very good.
Okay.
Good talking to everybody.
All right,
Take care.
bye-bye. God bless.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.